Have you ever used an app that just works? It's like everything is right where you expect it to be. It's so smooth, so intuitive, it almost feels like it's reading your mind. And then, well, then there's the other kind. The kind that makes you want to throw your phone clean across the room. It's clunky, it's confusing, and it's just endlessly frustrating.
So what's the deal? What's the difference between those two experiences? Is it just dumb luck, some kind of stroke of genius from a developer, or is there actually something more deliberate going on behind the scenes? Well, the answer, as it turns out, is a really fascinating and structured process.
So what is this secret sauce? The magic behind tech that feels totally effortless isn't really magic at all. It's a whole discipline called interaction design. You can think of it as the invisible architecture that shapes our digital world.
At its core, interaction design is really a conversation between a person and a product. And it's not just some random chat, it's a very intentional process. It's about systematically figuring out what people actually need, then creating solutions to meet those needs. And then, this is key, testing to see if those solutions actually work. But the most crucial part? It always, and I mean always, comes back to the user and what they're trying to get done.
Now, this whole philosophy is built on a few core beliefs. First, great design isn't a one-and-done thing. It's a continuous cycle of making things better. Second, the user is always the North Star. They guide every single decision. Third, you can't have it all. Designers are constantly making trade-offs, balancing what the business wants, what's technically possible, and what the user needs. And finally, and this is a big one, it's about exploring lots of different ideas, not just getting stuck on the very first one that pops into your head.
Okay, so if the user is our North Star, how does that actually translate into practice? It all comes down to a foundational philosophy that drives, well, everything.
And a people-centered approach is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Instead of starting with some cool new piece of tech and asking, hey, what can we do with this? Designers start with a person. They ask, what is this person trying to achieve, and how can we help them do it better? Their real-world goals, their habits, their behaviors, that's the starting line for every single decision.
So, why bother going to all this trouble? Well, there are two huge benefits. First is expectation management. When you involve users from the get-go, there are no big disappointing surprises when the product launches. They know it's coming. Second, you get ownership. When people feel like they've had a hand in creating something, they become its biggest fans. They're way more invested in its success.
And this brings up a really important distinction. We've been talking a lot about users, but they're part of a much larger group called stakeholders. Now, a stakeholder is basically anyone with a vested interest in the project. That could be the CEO, the lead engineer, an investor. So here's the key point. While all users are stakeholders, not all stakeholders are users. And great design is all about balancing the needs of everyone involved.
Okay, so we've got the why, that whole people-centered philosophy. But what about the how? Let's take a look at the actual blueprint designers use to put all these ideas into action.
A really popular model for this process is called the double diamond. And it's a great visual because it shows that design isn't a straight line, but this series of expansions and contractions. In that first diamond, you start wide to discover every single part of a problem. Then you narrow down and define the one most important problem you need to solve. Then you hit the second diamond. You go wide again to develop tons of potential solutions. And finally, you narrow down one last time to deliver the single best one.
And within that double diamond, designers are basically doing four fundamental things over and over. First, discovering what users actually need. Second, designing multiple different alternatives to meet those needs. Third, building prototypes, which are basically early testable versions of the product. And fourth, constantly evaluating those prototypes with real users to see what's working and what isn't.
But here's the real kicker. Those four activities aren't a simple checklist you just run through once. They form a continuous, iterative loop. Designers discover, design, prototype, and evaluate, and then they do it again, and again, and again. Each cycle refines the idea, getting it closer and closer to a final product that truly works for people.
This brings up a super practical question, right? If the process is all about creating options and alternatives, at some point you actually have to pick one.
So how do they do it? When you've got a bunch of good designs on the table, how do you decide which one makes it to the finish line? Is it just a gut feeling? Do they just pick the one they like the best?
Oh, definitely not. In fact, a lot of these decisions are driven by cold, hard data. One of the most powerful tools for this is called A/B testing.
It's simple. You create two versions of a design, let's say a red Buy Now button and a green one, and you show them to different groups of real users. Then you just measure which one performs better. This isn't about opinions. It's about letting people's actions tell you what actually works. It's a method that companies use to optimize everything, often with millions of dollars on the line.
So, when you pull back the curtain on all this, you start to see that great digital experiences aren't the result of some mystical, magical, creative process.
So just remember, the difference between an app you love and one you can't wait to delete isn't magic at all. It's a deliberate, thoughtful, and people-centered process. The most successful products in the world don't start with a cool idea for a feature. They start with a deep, deep understanding of a human need.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought. The next time you're using a piece of technology that just feels right, it's simple, it's intuitive, it's actually enjoyable, take a second and look a little deeper. Don't just see the screen in front of you. Try to see the choices behind it. Can you see the fingerprints of the process we just talked about? Can you see all that thoughtful, iterative work that turned a really complex problem into a simple, elegant flow?